Picture this. You and your spouse have been saving for 5 long years, not casually, not comfortably, but deliberately, cutting out vacations, delaying new cars, avoiding splurges, and putting almost every personal desire on hold, all for one familiar and deeply American dream: buying your first home. Finally, after years of sacrifice, the day arrives and you find what feels like the perfect place: a quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby, and a price that, after running the numbers over and over again, seems just barely within reach if everything goes right. You calculate again, stretch your budget a little further than planned, and even offer more than the asking price, not because you want to overpay, but because you want certainty, because you want to win. And then it's over in seconds. You lose, not because another family offered more, not because someone else needed the home more than you did, not because of timing or bad luck, but because of an invisible buyer you never even saw. They paid 100% cash. No inspection, no negotiation, no waiting for bank approval, no uncertainty, just a short email that ends the process instantly. Offer accepted. You don't get a second chance, you don't get an explanation, and you don't even know who you were competing against. Only that whatever game you were playing, it wasn't the same one they were in. Weeks later, curiosity gets the better of you, and you drive past the house, noticing that no one has moved in, no moving trucks arrived, no cars sit in the driveway, and no lights turn on at night, as if the home itself is waiting. Then it appears online again, but this time not listed as for sale, not offered to another family hoping for stability, but relabeled with 2 words that change everything: for rent. That moment lands differently because you realize something fundamental has shifted. This was never just about a home, it was about an asset, and you were never the intended owner. Welcome to the new reality of America, a place where the middle-class dream of homeownership isn't simply becoming harder, but is being quietly replaced by an entirely different system. A system where Wall Street doesn't just control stocks and bonds anymore, but walks directly into your neighborhood, reshaping it house by house, block by block. And the name most closely tied to this shift is BlackRock. BlackRock is not a normal company by any meaningful definition. It is the largest asset manager in the world, controlling more than $10 trillion, a number so large that it exceeds the entire GDP of almost every country on this planet. At the top sits Larry Fink, a figure who doesn't dominate television screens or shout on cable news, but whose decisions ripple outward, quietly affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people. For decades, BlackRock focused on traditional financial markets, stocks, bonds, ETFs, effectively owning small pieces of nearly everything, embedded invisibly throughout the global economy. But over time, a realization took hold. Financial assets are fragile, dependent on confidence, central banks, policy decisions, and collective belief, all of which can change rapidly. So BlackRock began shifting its language, and more importantly, its strategy, towards something different, what they began calling real assets. These are things you can't print more of, things society cannot function without, things that maintain demand whether the economy is booming or collapsing: water, electricity, energy, and most critically, housing. A home is not optional. You can sell stocks, delay luxury purchases, or cut discretionary spending, but you cannot opt out of shelter, and that reality gives housing a unique kind of power. There is a quote often attributed to the global elite: "You will own nothing, and you will be happy." A sentence that sounds harmless on the surface, even progressive, like a minimalist philosophy or a vision of a sharing economy. But when you look closely at what is actually happening around you, that quote begins to feel less like a prediction and more like a roadmap. Mainstream media often tries to calm public concern with a single statistic. Institutional investors, they say, only own about 3 to 4% of total U.S. homes, a number that sounds small, manageable, and not worth worrying about. But this is a classic distraction because the problem isn't the total number. The problem is concentration. These funds don't buy homes randomly across the country. They target specific locations, focusing on growth, migration, and long-term demand. Atlanta, Phoenix, Texas, Florida, cities with population booms, job opportunities, and housing shortages, places where young professionals move to build futures and where demand consistently exceeds supply. They don't need to own the entire market. They only need to own enough to influence pricing, shape expectations, and quietly turn housing from a ladder into a wall. During the era of near-zero interest rates, something unprecedented occurred. Money became almost free. Central banks flooded the system with liquidity, asset prices soared, and debt lost much of its traditional risk. For everyday people, borrowing still involved approval processes, credit checks, documentation, and anxiety about rising rates. But for trillion-dollar institutions, the rules were fundamentally different. They accessed capital at a scale and cost no individual could ever match. And while you had to beg the bank, wait weeks for approval, prove stability, and worry about the future, they simply pushed a button. They bought in bulk, entire subdivisions, hundreds of homes at once, sometimes even before construction finished. And once those homes were acquired, something critical happened. They disappeared from the buying market. Homes that should have rotated through families, building stability and generational wealth, became permanent rental assets, locked away from ownership. This is where a new social class quietly emerges, the permanent renter class. These are not unemployed people, and they are not people who failed. They work, they earn, they budget responsibly, but they can never save fast enough to outrun institutional capital. Every rent payment builds wealth, just not for them. Some economists describe this shift as neo-feudalism because in medieval times, lords owned the land and peasants worked it, while ownership created power and dependency enforced obedience. Today, the structure looks different, but the dynamic is familiar. Corporations own the homes and citizens work, month after month, simply to pay rent. And unlike individual landlords, these corporations don't negotiate emotionally. They rely on algorithms. Algorithms don't care if your rent consumes half your income, don't care if your child changes schools, and don't care if inflation erodes your savings. They ask only one question: how much can prices rise before resistance becomes unavoidable? If you leave, it doesn't matter, because there is always someone else. A growing population, limited housing, and endless demand ensure replacement. You are no longer competing with your neighbor. You are competing with a data model optimized for profit and backed by trillions of dollars. The consequences ripple outward. Rents rise faster than wages. Savings shrink. Homeownership gets delayed or abandoned entirely. And young people postpone marriage, children, and long-term stability. Your parents may have bought a home in their 20s or 30s, turning it into equity, then security, then a foundation for life. But you pay rent to enrich a balance sheet, not because you are lazy or lack ambition, but because the rules of the game changed without your consent. This is not an accident, and it is not a failure of the free market. It is a strategic outcome. A nation of renters is predictable, easier to manage, less likely to resist, because renters depend on access rather than ownership. Ownership creates leverage, independence, and choice, which is precisely why it is being centralized. But knowledge changes the equation. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. You stop blaming yourself, start questioning policy, and begin tracking money flows instead of headlines. And housing, as powerful as it is only the first layer. What comes next goes even deeper. In the next video, we will talk about the digital dollar, CBDC, and why programmable money could represent the next stage of control after housing and cash. If not owning a home already feels restrictive, imagine not fully owning your own money. If you want to understand the things television avoids, subscribe to Crisis Rewind, because the truth is already here. The only question is whether you are willing to face it.